It started on a quiet Thursday morning. The kind of morning where the world feels calm, predictable, safe. I was making coffee when I heard a soft thud against the door. When I opened it, a thin yellow envelope fluttered against my leg. No return address, just my name in bold print. I unfolded it, half curious, half annoyed. HOA notice. Fence construction in violation of Community Code 14B. I froze. Violation? I hadn't even built the fence yet. Just a few wooden posts marking the line where it would stand. I had the city permit, the measurements, everything legal and filed. Still, the letter said I had 72 hours to cease and remove all unauthorized construction. At first, I thought it was a clerical mistake. The HOA had been strict before, trash bins left out too long, grass half an inch too tall, but this was absurd. I called the number on the letter. No one picked up. I emailed the address listed on their website. No reply. By the next morning, another letter appeared, taped right over the first one. Final warning. Noncompliance will result in daily fines. It felt personal now. Someone was watching. I walked outside, scanned the neighborhood. A few curtains moved. One neighbor waved awkwardly, pretending he didn't know what was happening. I could feel it. This wasn't about the fence. This was about control. That afternoon, I decided to confront them directly. I attended the next HOA meeting, held in a small, overlit community room that smelled like burnt coffee and stale air. The board sat behind a long folding table, each member armed with a binder thicker than a phone book. At the center sat the president, Mr. Cranston, gray hair, polished glasses, and a smirk that didn't fade. When it was my turn to speak, I laid everything on the table. My property survey, the construction permit, even photos showing how far the fence was from the road. Cranston barely glanced at the papers. He leaned back in his chair and said, "That's cute, but we make the rules here." Laughter rippled through the room. My stomach tightened. I asked calmly, "So you're saying my legally approved fence is against your rules?" He shrugged. "Our community has standards. Your fence doesn't fit the aesthetic." "The aesthetic?" I repeated. "It's a fence, not a billboard." That earned another chuckle from the board. One woman whispered something to the person beside her. Cranston smiled wider. "Remove it by Monday," he said, "or the fines begin." I left the meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a deep, simmering anger. I wasn't a troublemaker. I paid my dues, followed the guidelines, and kept to myself. But that night, as I looked out the window at those lonely wooden posts, something in me shifted. The moonlight traced faint shadows across the yard, cutting between the stakes that were supposed to be my fence line. It wasn't much to look at yet, but it represented something I'd worked for. Privacy. Independence. My own corner of the world. Now, they wanted to take that away because it didn't fit their standards. I picked up the letter again, reading every word slowly. Violation. Noncompliance. Penalty. It wasn't the language of community. It was the language of control. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them with anger or shouting. That's what they expected. They wanted me to break the rules, to give them a reason to fine me into submission. No, if they wanted to fight, I'd give them one, but not with hammers or nails. I'd build something stronger than a fence. A defense they couldn't tear down. A wall made of paper, signatures, and law. I opened my laptop and started digging. HOA bylaws, county zoning laws, easement records. I wanted to know exactly how deep their roots went. And more importantly, where they began to rot. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. My desk was a mess of notes, highlighted sections, and screenshots. For every rule they had, there was a loophole. For every claim of authority, there was a limit. And I was going to find every single one of them. The next morning, I looked out at the yard again. The posts were still there, standing stubbornly against the rising sun. It almost looked symbolic, a half-built fence daring them to make the next move. I knew they would. But this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. Because sometimes you don't build fences just to keep people out. You build walls to remind them where the boundaries really are. And my wall? It wasn't going to be made of wood or steel. It was going to be built from patience, silence, and strategy. They thought they'd stop me from building a fence. What they didn't realize was I just started building something much bigger. By Monday morning, the first fine notice arrived. slipped neatly into my mailbox like a taunt. $100 per day for noncompliance. The paper smelled of ink and arrogance. I didn't tear it up. I didn't call or complain. I just pinned it to my corkboard under one word I wrote in black marker. Evidence. The HOA thought silence meant surrender. But in my mind, silence was strategy. That week, I became a ghost in my own neighborhood, watching, recording, learning. I walked the perimeter of my property, camera in hand, documenting every inch. I photographed the boundary stakes, the fence posts, even the nearby houses. If they were going to play this game, I was going to learn every rule and how to bend it back at them. By Thursday, I had a folder full of files. HOA correspondence, meeting transcripts, satellite images, and copies of the community covenants. Most people never read those things, but I did line by line. And buried on page 37, in a section no one probably noticed, I found it. Structural modifications require prior approval unless the project falls within pre-approved city permit guidelines. My permit was city-approved, which meant I wasn't breaking any rule. That night, I printed the clause and taped it beside the fine notice. The wall above my desk was slowly turning into a battlefield of paper. But I wasn't done. I needed allies. I started asking quiet questions around the neighborhood. Most people avoided HOA drama, but a few whispered their own stories. Unfair fines, threats, favoritism. One elderly couple said the HOA president made them repaint their shutters 3 times because he didn't like the shade of blue. Another neighbor had been fined for having too many plants on her porch. It was a pattern of power play, and I was done playing nice. By the end of the week, I contacted a real estate attorney. Her name was Claire Daniels. Calm voice, sharp eyes, and a reputation for dismantling HOAs like clockwork. I told her everything, showed her my documents, and waited for her reaction. She leaned back, reading the letters quietly, then smiled. They overstepped, she said, and from what I can see, they've done it before. What can we do? I asked. Everything, she replied. But first we build your case. Brick by brick. The next few days moved like a silent storm. Claire drafted formal requests for HOA financial records and board meeting notes, things they were legally required to share. I sent them through certified mail with tracking numbers. No one could say they didn't receive them. Then I waited. Weeks went by. The HOA kept sending fines, but their tone began to change. Less confident, more desperate. Failure to comply will result in legal action, one letter said. Claire just laughed. Let them, she said. They don't realize they've already lost. During one of her investigations, Claire discovered something big. The HOA president, Mr. Cranston, the man who mocked me, had built his own fence 3 years ago. A tall white vinyl fence that, according to zoning laws, extended 2 feet beyond his property line. He'd broken the exact rule he fined me for. When I saw the photos, I almost laughed out loud. It was poetic. The enforcer of community standards violating them himself. Claire drafted another letter, short, precise, and deadly. Dear Mr. Cranston, it began, we have identified multiple code violations on your property, as well as procedural misconduct in your actions as HOA president. We request a formal meeting to resolve these matters, or we will pursue legal remedies. This time, the HOA didn't ignore me. 2 days later, Cranston called personally. His voice had lost its authority. Let's be reasonable, he said. We can work this out. I could hear the nervousness in his tone. Work this out, I said quietly. You mean after the fines, the harassment, and the mockery? He hesitated. We didn't mean for it to go that far. I almost smiled. Oh, but it did. After the call, I sat by my window, looking at those same fence posts still standing in the yard, half-built, yet undefeated. I hadn't moved a single board, and still, the balance of power had shifted. They thought they were teaching me a lesson in obedience. Instead, they were learning a lesson in consequence. The next morning, I saw something new taped to my mailbox, another letter. But this one wasn't a fine. It was an invitation. Emergency HOA meeting. Attendance requested. I knew what that meant. They wanted to settle before this got public, before lawyers, auditors, and insurance companies started asking questions they couldn't answer. I looked at the letter for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it beside the first one. War had been declared with paper, and paper would decide the winner. I wasn't done building my wall. I had just laid the foundation. By the time the emergency meeting rolled around, the air in the neighborhood felt different. The people who used to wave politely now looked away when I passed. Some whispered, others just watched. Everyone knew something was happening between me and the HOA, but no one knew how deep the cracks went. That night, the meeting room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors squeezed into corners, and the board sat up front like they were on trial, which in a way they were. I walked in with a single folder in my hand. Claire walked beside me, calm, confident, unreadable. Mr. Cranston cleared his throat as we sat down. "Let's keep this civil," he said, but his voice trembled slightly. "We're here to resolve a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Claire repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling months of harassment now?" Murmurs filled the room. Cranston glanced at his board members, who suddenly found their notes very interesting. I didn't say a word. I just watched him the same way he'd watched me at that first meeting. Only this time, the smirk was gone. Claire opened the folder. "Let's start simple," she said. "We have evidence that your client's fence is entirely within his legal property line and city approved. We also have proof that you, Mr. Cranston, installed a non-compliant structure 2 feet over your boundary 3 years ago. You fined him for something you're guilty of yourself." Cranston's face went pale. That's irrelevant to this case." "No," she said, leaning forward, "it's exactly relevant." The room went silent. Every word echoed. You could almost hear the sound of his authority cracking. Then she pulled out the second folder, thicker than the first. "And these," she continued, "are the minutes of your board meetings from the last 2 years. Several votes were held without quorum. Budgets signed without disclosure. Funds transferred without record. You violated not only your own bylaws, but state HOA statutes." Cranston swallowed hard. One board member stood abruptly and whispered something about needing air. Another rubbed his temples. The audience shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were watching the fall of their own little government. Claire didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Every document she placed on the table was another brick in the wall I'd been building. When the meeting ended, they didn't vote, they didn't argue, they just adjourned in silence. As people filed out, a few neighbors patted me on the shoulder. Some smiled for the first time in weeks. Others avoided my eyes, probably wondering if they'd be next on my list. Outside, the night felt cold but calm. For the first time, I could breathe. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Over the next few days, the HOA went quiet. No more letters. No fines. Just silence. But I wasn't foolish enough to think it was peace. It was retreat. So I pressed on. Claire assembled a small legal team, a property specialist, a financial auditor, and a litigator. I didn't just have a lawyer anymore. I had an army, a wall of lawyers. Every time the HOA tried to push back, my team countered twice as hard. They sent a warning. We sent a motion. They questioned a clause. We buried them in citations and precedents. Every move they made, we were already 3 steps ahead. The legal fees alone must have been crushing them. Rumors spread that the HOA's insurance was pulling out, that they couldn't cover the cost of the case if it escalated. Some members started resigning quietly, disappearing from the board altogether. The once powerful HOA was unraveling, thread by thread. Cranston tried to call me again one evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, tired. "Let's talk, please. We can end this." But I didn't want to end it yet. I wanted them to understand what they had done, not just to me, but to everyone they'd bullied and fined and intimidated. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was accountability. Weeks passed. Then, one morning, I saw a moving truck outside Cranston's house. He was leaving. Just like that, the man who claimed to control the neighborhood packed his empire into cardboard boxes. A new notice went up a few days later. Effective immediately, the HOA board is under audit and restructuring. I watched from my porch as residents gathered around to read it. Some smiled. Some cheered quietly. Others just shook their heads, relieved it was finally over. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any speech. The fence posts were still there, standing untouched through the storm. They weren't just wood anymore. They were a reminder, a symbol of how far I'd gone to prove a simple truth. You don't win wars with anger. You win them with patience, precision, and paper. The HOA had built their power on fear. I built mine on law. And that wall, my wall of lawyers, stood higher than anything they could ever tear down. The weeks that followed felt like the calm after a long storm. Too quiet, too still, as if the air itself was waiting for something to break. I hadn't heard from a HOA in nearly a month. No letters, no fines, not even a glance from the neighbors who once peeked through their blinds to watch me like a criminal. Then, one morning, I found a white envelope slipped under my door. Not yellow this time. White, clean, embossed with the HOA seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of final board meeting. Attendance requested. No threats, no demands. Just an invitation. I almost laughed. After everything they'd done, they were inviting me back to the same room where it all started. Part of me didn't want to go. But curiosity has a way of dragging you toward closure, even when you know it might burn. So that evening, I went. The meeting room looked smaller than before. Maybe it was the empty chairs. Half the board had resigned by now. Only two remained, both avoiding my eyes. Mr. Cranston's nameplate still sat at the head of the table, though the chair behind it was empty. A younger man, maybe in his 30s, took the seat instead. He looked nervous, inexperienced, someone who had inherited a mess he didn't create. "Mr. Dalton," he said, clearing his throat, "thank you for coming. As you know, several changes have taken place within the HOA. We're restructuring." I didn't speak. I just nodded slightly. He continued, "We'd like to offer a formal withdrawal of all previous complaints and fines against you. Your fence construction is hereby approved. Additionally, the board would like to apologize for the handling of your case." Apologize. The words sounded strange coming from him. I leaned forward. "So it's over?" He hesitated. "Yes. For now." That last part caught me off guard. For now? Claire, sitting beside me, looked up from her notes. "What does that mean?" she asked. The man shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else. Something you should probably know." He opened a folder and slid a few documents across the table. Property maps, boundary charts, and then I saw it. An unfamiliar line cutting through my backyard, marked in red ink. "What is this?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "We discovered that part of the land behind your fence, roughly 6 feet, was never officially transferred to the HOA when the subdivision was developed. It still belongs to the original owner, or rather, their estate." Claire frowned. "That's impossible. This neighborhood was built 20 years ago." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. But the estate never finalized the sale. It's been sitting in a legal limbo all this time. Technically, it's private land." I stared at the map, tracing that thin, red line with my finger. 6 feet. That's all it was. 6 feet of dirt and grass that didn't belong to them and never did. "So," I said quietly, "you find me, threaten me, and try to destroy me over land that wasn't even yours to begin with." No one answered. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. The new president's eyes darted to the papers, then to the floor. He knew there was nothing left to say. The truth was right there in black and white. Claire gathered the documents carefully and stood. "We'll take copies of these," she said, "and I trust the board will refrain from further contact with my client." The man nodded weakly. "Of course." As we left the room, I glanced one last time at Cranston's empty chair. The ghost of his authority still lingered there, but it was fading, just like his power, his voice, his control. Outside, the night air was cool. The streetlights buzzed softly, casting pale halos on the wet pavement. I took a long breath, feeling the weight of months lift off my shoulders. It was over, or at least it felt like it. The next morning, I started building again. This time, there were no interruptions, no angry letters. The sound of hammers echoed through the quiet neighborhood, sharp and rhythmic. Each nail, each plank felt like closure. When the fence finally stood complete, I ran my hand across the smooth wood. Solid, straight, honest. It wasn't just a boundary anymore. It was a monument to endurance. But as I reached the end of the line, the very edge of my property, I noticed something odd. The ground there looked different. The soil darker, the grass uneven, as if it had been disturbed recently. I crouched down and brushed the dirt away. Beneath it was a corner of metal, cold, weathered, and engraved with faint letters. A small plaque, buried just under the surface. The inscription was barely legible, but I could make out the words. Property of W. Cranston Development Corporation. My chest tightened. Cranston's company, not the HOA. His company. The estate that supposedly owned that strip of land. It wasn't some forgotten name in an old file. It was him. He hadn't just been enforcing the rules. He'd been protecting something. I stood there, staring at that metal plate in the dirt, the pieces clicking into place one by one. The fines, the threats, the desperate meeting. It was never about the fence. It was about hiding the fact that he'd never legally transferred that land to the HOA. He'd been covering his tracks, using the board as a shield. And now the shield was gone. I didn't dig any deeper. I didn't have to. The truth was buried right there. Quiet, metallic, undeniable. As the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, I leaned against my new fence and looked out across the yard. They had blocked my fence. I had built a wall of lawyers. And behind that wall, I uncovered something far bigger than any of us realized. The HOA didn't just lose their fight. They lost their foundation. Sometimes justice doesn't come with noise or headlines. Sometimes it comes with silence, and a single buried secret finally seeing the light. And as the evening breeze moved through the gaps of my fence, I smiled. Because the real wall I'd built wasn't made of lawyers or wood. It was made of truth. And that truth would stand longer than any of their walls ever could.